explain myself. They want to trust God to a certain level, and then when it gets to a point where it brings them out of a comfort zone, then they want to take things into their own hands. Okay? Then at that point, when it gets to an uncomfortable level, they begin to worry, have anxiety and strife, and they begin to make their own decisions about what they're going to do rather than letting God sort those things out. And they think about what they are going to do now. Right? They have this certain level of trust. It's like you ask them, yeah, I trust God, but then when the time comes where the rubber hits the road, they get to a certain point, the trust of God begins to get iffy, and they start to try to take things into their own hands. And I think a lot of people are that way. Then when things work out, they're back to church, they're trusting God, things are good, then something happens again, oh, I'm trusting God, and then finally, oh, I got to do something about this. It's as if they only trust God to a certain level. And, anything that takes us outside of the boundaries of our comfort zones, test our faith. Me leading songs, that was hard for me to do. That was really hard for me to do. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's an embarrassment factor. Maybe it's the fear factor. The seed of that fear planted in my mind that hindered me from leading songs. But I do it. I know what it is for you is different. What it is for me is different. But can you think of things that hinder you, that you won't do because of fear? I don't share the gospel because I really don't know that much, and I probably ought to learn a lot more before I do it. Right? You probably heard that a few times. Right? That's a fear, an uncertainty, a doubt that you can do it, even though God is with you. Those are the things that change us. I want you to know that anything that takes you outside of your comfort level is good for you. It's good for me. You know what I mean by that? It's in a way that, how do I say this? It's something that feels really bad at the time, but produces really good thoughts, really good results. So I encourage you, if you feel uncomfortable and you're being convicted to do something and you feel uncomfortable about it, you need to put some serious thought into it. God might be drawing you out of that comfort zone. Someone, you walk in and someone's sitting in your pew, you're like, I sit there every week. It's like you're messed up about that. Rather than mixing this up. And what if Don would have said, Jeremy's going to preach the very first day. We ain't going to sing any song. We're not going to do the Lord's Supper. We're not going to do anything. Jeremy's going to preach. Some of you guys would have been floored and would have sat there and had to think about that the entire time. You probably wouldn't even have heard anything I said because you would have been thinking about that. It's comfort that creates a lull in your mind. It lulls you to sleep. But when God does things to shake your life up, to bring you outside of that comfort zone, is what allows you to grow and have faith. So I encourage you to do that. Get outside. If it's hard for you to tell people that you love them, do it. If it's hard for you to go visit people in the hospital under uncomfortable situations with tubes in their noses and other things, do it. Those are things of love. Smash your pride. Let your prideful things be set aside. I encourage you to do those things. I think that when I think of someone who trusted God, I always think of Stephen. Stephen was mentioned in class too. Acts chapter 6 and 7. And I think of Stephen, he's preaching the gospel, man, and he is just hitting the nail right on the head. He's pounding these guys, and he's sharing with them this new wave of gospel of Jesus Christ. And the fact that you don't have to do things of the law necessarily, but it's going to be a transition from the law to the law of faith. And these guys couldn't handle it. It says that Stephen spoke with such wisdom, inspired by the Spirit, they couldn't handle it. And so they got people to lie on Stephen and say he was doing things, and saying things that he wasn't. And so they arrested him, they dragged him before the Sanhedrin. And Stephen stood in a room probably about this size, I have my guess. Sanhedrin, approximately 70 people plus some Romans. And he's standing, 70 men, that's intimidating. I don't care who you are. 70 influential men. And you're standing in front of them, and he stood there, and he said, men and brethren, and he began to recite their history. And he took them from their history and what God had done, and he transitioned all the way to Jesus Christ. And he said, which of the prophets have your fathers not persecuted? Huh? It's like he's, at the end, he begins to tear at them. And he says, you are stiff-necked and uncircumcised. And they couldn't handle it. It says they covered their ears and they gnashed their teeth and they rushed him. And they drug him out of the city to stone him because they couldn't stone him inside of the city. And he stood there, and it says, and he gazed up into heaven. He said, I see the glory of God. Now, some of us could have cowered. We probably wouldn't even have stood in front of the men and said what we really were inspired to say. Because we were full of fear, full of uncertainty of what might happen, doubt that God would deliver us. Those things would have crushed us, and we wouldn't have spoke up. Stephen stands and he says those things. He's outside the city and he peers up into heaven and he's gazing in heaven. He says, I see the glory of God. And I see the Son on the right hand, standing at the right hand of the Father. And they were so angry. Right? And they start to stone him. They stone him and he says, Lord, lay not the sin on their charge. It says, and he expired or fell asleep or died or however you want to put that. God didn't deliver him. And you think, wow, you really suffered. I'm not promising you that God will deliver you. I'm not promising that you won't suffer physically. I'm not promising that you won't be hit. But I am promising that he'll never leave you, turn his back on you, because he promised that. You know, I think about Jesus, him looking, gazing up into heaven, Jesus standing at the right-hand throne. I almost picture it as if the reason he's standing and not sitting is because he's concerned about what's happening with his people. He's peering down and seeing Stephen, you know, loving him, knowing that he's concerned. You think God is not on the edge of his seat longing to hear from you each day? But sometimes you despise him and don't even pray. Do you think he doesn't long for you to be in his word and connect with the spirit of his words? And delve into the scripture. And he's waiting, just listening and intent on you. You know, you are like a microspeck in this world. But for some reason, you get the privilege of him caring about you. That is big in our perspective. You know, the sheer fact that you were obedient to the gospel, you did the things that he asked, placed you in a position. Ephesians chapter 2 says that you were put in heavenly places. You were placed in a position that is favorable to him beyond everything else in this planet. God longs to know that you trust him. Longs to know that you hear him. And he hears you. You know, I encourage you to turn over your fears, your uncertainties, your doubts, to crush those things and allow yourself to grow. Trust God. I really encourage you to do those things. I encourage you to leave this place changed. Not the same person that you once were. But each time that you're here delving into the scriptures, each time you're at home delving into the scriptures, that you leave changed. You know, today, I encourage you to do those things. And I hope that if any of you are out here and you're not Christians, you know, I don't know all you guys. If any of you are not Christians, if you want to become a Christian, you can find me, you can find Brother Don, you can find any one of the guys in the congregation, and allow these guys to teach you. Allow them to instruct you in the Great Commission, Matthew chapter 28. Allow them to teach you, make disciples, immerse you, and continue to teach you. You know, oftentimes we forget that there's those